Over 624 million pesos. I mean, wow, that's a massive number, right? But what makes this figure truly jaw-dropping isn't just the sheer scale of the cash. It's what this exact number represents, and the absolute extremes it pushed a local city government to go to. Picture this: a local city hall literally marching up to the gates of an entire functioning international airport, slapping a massive tax delinquency notice right on the runway, and trying to auction off the whole complex to the highest bidder. No way, right? It sounds like the plot of a crazy legal thriller, but I promise you, this actually happened.
Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're unpacking a seriously gripping legal duel over taxation, government property, and local autonomy. We're talking about the Manila International Airport Authority versus the city of Paranaque. Now, this isn't just your standard story about unpaid bills. It's a fundamental, bare-knuckle battle between the supremacy of the national government and the taxing powers of local governments. So let's dive right into it. Okay, let's quickly map out our route for today. First, we'll look at the actual auctioning of the international airport. Then, we'll break down that massive tax bill. After that, we're diving into the Supreme Court's majority ruling, where public dominion wins out, followed by a quick look at how they define a GOCC. And finally, we'll weigh the dissent's incredibly fiery rebuttal. Just to establish our ground rules here, everything we're exploring today is drawn directly from a highly polarized, landmark July 2006 en banc Supreme Court decision. This ruling completely divided the court, basically forcing the justices to grapple with the very essence of property and state power in the Philippines. All right, part one, auctioning an international airport. Let's set the stage for this crazy showdown between the Manila International Airport Authority, we'll call them MIAA, and the city of Paranaque. Now, the tension here didn't just happen overnight. It escalated over a whole decade. Between 1992 and 2001, the city of Paranaque claimed that real estate taxes were just piling up on the roughly 600 hectares of land, runways, and buildings that make up the Ninoy Aquino International Airport complex. By June of 2001, things got real. MIA received final notices of real estate tax delinquency. Warrants of levy were actually issued. The mayor literally threatened to sell the airport at a public auction. Fast forward a bit to January 2003, and the city went ahead and posted actual auction notices in barangay halls and even published them in a national newspaper. The big auction was set for February 7, 2003 at exactly 10 a.m. Well, in a super dramatic 11th-hour scramble, MIA filed an urgent motion for a temporary restraining order with the Supreme Court the night before. The court issued the order immediately on the 7th, but, and you can't make this up, the city of Paranaque only received it at 1:25 p.m. That's exactly 3 hours after the public auction of the international airport had already finished.
Moving on to part two, the massive tax bill. So what's really interesting here is the financial incentive. What drove a city to literally try to auction off a national gateway? Well, just look at the sheer magnitude of these financial stakes. If we look across multiple tax declarations spanning nearly a decade, the core tax due was over 392 million pesos. And then you have to add a staggering penalty of over 232 million pesos just for non-payment. The grand total? That massive 624.5 million pesos we talked about earlier. To put that into perspective, for a local government unit, a sudden influx of over 500 million pesos is absolutely transformative. We're talking new roads, schools, health centers, just massive local development. You can immediately see why Paranaque fought so fiercely to collect every single cent. Okay, part three. The majority, public dominion wins. But the big question is, did Paranaque actually have the right to tax the airport in the first place? To figure that out, we're going to impartially shift our focus over to Justice Carpio's majority ruling, which decisively favors the national government and the airport authority. The majority actually anchors its argument deep in the Civil Code, specifically Article 420. They point out that things intended for public use, like roads, canals, rivers, and quote-unquote ports constructed by the state, are considered property of public dominion. The Supreme Court majority basically reasoned that a modern international airport is simply today's version of a port. And because the airport's lands and buildings are clearly intended for public use, meaning international and domestic travel, they indisputably belong to the state, or the Republic of the Philippines. Now, here's why that classification is absolutely crucial. The vital legal consequence of being public dominion is that the property is, legally speaking, outside the commerce of man. Basically, it cannot be sold, it cannot be encumbered, and it certainly cannot be auctioned off by any local government just to satisfy a tax debt.
The majority argued that if properties of public dominion could actually be auctioned off, essential public services would literally grind to a halt. Just imagine the chaos if Paranaque had successfully handed over a 600-hectare runway to some private bidder.
That brings us to part 4, defining a GOCC.
Now, you might be wondering about the city's defense. Paranaque argued that MIAA is a government-owned or controlled corporation, basically a GOCC, and under the Local Government Code of 1991, tax exemptions for GOCCs were expressly withdrawn. This right here gets to the invisible legal concepts at the absolute core of this dispute. The majority countered by stating that MIAA is actually not a GOCC at all. Instead, they strictly defined MIAA as an instrumentality under the Administrative Code of 1987. So what is an instrumentality? It's basically an agency of the national government that has some corporate powers and operational autonomy, but it isn't organized as a stock or non-stock corporation. And why does this distinction matter so much? Because under Section 133(0) of the Local Government Code, local governments are explicitly prohibited from levying taxes of any kind on the national government, its agencies, and its instrumentalities. And this brilliantly illustrates the critical dividing line the majority drew. For an entity to be a true GOCC, it has to be organized as a stock corporation, meaning it has capital stock divided into shares and dividends, or a non-stock corporation, which means it has to have members. Well, MIAA has no capital stock divided into shares, and it definitely has no members. So the majority concludes that MIAA is an instrumentality, not a GOCC, and therefore it perfectly escapes the tax reach of the local government. Finally, Part 5, the dissent, a fiery rebuttal. As you can probably guess, this interpretation did not sit well with everyone. Let's move over to the other side of the courtroom and examine Justice Tinga's passionate dissenting opinion, which forcefully champions the city of Paranaque and the whole constitutional mandate of local autonomy. The dissent absolutely did not mince words here. Justice Tinga criticized the majority for, and I quote, shattering statutes and judicial precedents left and right in order to protect the precious Ming vase that is the Manila International Airport Authority. It's incredible rhetoric. The dissent essentially views the airport not as some untouchable sovereign entity, but as a fragile Ming vase that's being unjustly protected at the direct expense of a local government's legitimate rights and revenues. The dissent's core legal counter-argument really hinges on Section 193 of the Local Government Code. This section expressly withdrew previously granted tax exemptions for all persons, whether natural or juridical, including government-owned or controlled corporations. The dissent argues that MIA is undeniably a juridical person. Therefore, when the Local Government Code was enacted, it intentionally swept away MIA's tax shields. For sure, the dissent views the majority's reliance on the Administrative Code's super narrow definition of a GOCC as a flawed technical loophole. A loophole that, in their eyes, completely ignores the broader intent of Congress to empower local governments.
Now, this disagreement builds into a much larger jurisprudential earthquake. The dissent angrily lists off numerous major precedents that they argue are being silently destroyed by the majority's new ruling. By deciding that instrumentalities are completely immune to local taxation, the dissent points out that the majority implicitly overturns previous rulings that allowed local governments to tax the Mactan Cebu International Airport, the Lung Center of the Philippines, the GSIS in Davao, and the Philippine Ports Authority in Iloilo. The dissent warns that the majority is effectively declaring war on the taxing powers of provinces, cities, and municipalities nationwide.
And honestly, that leaves us with a really profound tension at the heart of statecraft. On one hand, we absolutely have the vital need to protect the public dominion, right? We have to ensure that essential national infrastructure, like an international airport, isn't paralyzed or sold off because of local tax disputes. But on the other hand, we have the constitutionally guaranteed autonomy of local governments. They actually rely on these massive corporate entities in their backyards to generate the revenue needed to serve their citizens. So it all boils down to this. Does local autonomy end where the national runway begins? Well, the Supreme Court majority said yes, but the dissent ensures the debate is far from over. Thanks for joining me on The Explainer today. Keep questioning, keep learning, and I'll catch you next time.